Hello to everybody who's joined our webinar dealing with the North American and British press, a user's guide. We hope we've got some interesting stuff for you to see today. Let's have a quick look at the agenda. Okay, I'm Peter Shackleton, Managing Director at éclat Marketing in the UK. We are a specialist business-to-business technology and telecom PR agency, and I'm going to be hosting the webinar today. So first of all, let me introduce Aimee Rhodes. As I say, she's CMO at Corero Network Security, and she's responsible for the branding, lead generation, marketing strategies, as well as the PR for that firm. Aimee has more than 20 years of expertise in global communications, and she's also a former journalist, having been a foreign correspondent with Reuters and also a TV reporter. And over to Aimee.
Thanks, Peter. Well, as you just heard, I've spent more than a decade in journalism. And then I moved over to what many marketing people probably know that journalists consider is the dark side. And since doing that, I have been working to create successful PR campaigns, both in the United States, the UK, and elsewhere around the world. So I'm very fortunate because I believe I have a unique perspective. I believe that there are some universal tenets when you're selecting a PR firm, as well as when you are pitching certain PR campaigns. And regarding the PR campaigns, as well as having some universal commonalities, there are as many differences as there are similarities. But at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer that perception is reality, and that PR gives you the ability to define your own reality. Next slide, please. Oh, you're up there. Thank you. So it sounds really self-evident, and I'm sure that everybody's thought of this. But first and foremost, with the buy-in from the rest of your management team, it's paramount to know what your end goals are. Whether that is to raise your stock prices through PR, build your brand equity, drive leads. And these can vary from country to country. In one country, you may be focused on raising your stock prices. In another country, you may be trying to drive leads. So that's paramount because that'll help determine your tactics. It'll help determine which PR firms you opt to use and how you move forward with those firms, whether you target certain publications, certain end users, or how it works. So in terms of the process, it's very important to do your research and your due diligence on your PR firms. There's many options. As we know from éclat, they have offices in the U.S., they have offices in the U.K. Currently, we like to work with local companies, like boutiques, like éclat, that have specialized people in each country. And currently, I'm working with firms in the U.S., for example, the U.K., France, Italy, Spain, Taiwan. Each of these countries has its own purpose-built PR campaign that's suited for that region. And it's also important to note that whenever you work with these firms, that from the outset that you understand your success criteria and that they're agreed upon before you start your campaigns. So it's at the end of the day, it's critical that you and your PR firm speak the same language. And that could be literally or figuratively. It's important before we move on to talk about some of the differences between the two countries that we have just a quick understanding of some basic things that need to be aligned. First of all, you need to understand, like I said before, what your end goals are, and those end goals and the PR strategy need to be aligned. And it doesn't work in a vacuum. So this also needs to be aligned with, for example, your marketing and your sales. And again, you need to have local buy-in, and you need to be able to have realistic expectations. What works, as we'll talk about, for one country doesn't necessarily work in another country. You need to have the right resources in place. You need to have the executives who are able, willing to speak to the press, and they need to be available if you want to be successful at a moment's notice. And I view the PR teams that we work with as an extension of our internal team, and they actually have direct access to the executives, which I have found to be very effective. And you need to be able to provide the PR team with real stories, which we'll talk about further in another minute. Next slide, please. But first and foremost, you have to understand that if a campaign works in the U.S., it doesn't necessarily work everywhere. That's a false assumption. And if you take that assumption, it's the kiss of death. If you believe whatever you're plugging in the States, you can just take and send and reproduce in the UK or elsewhere, you're not going to be very effective. As well, if you believe that you know, the CEO in this situation, oh, we'll fly him out a couple times a year, we'll do our PR campaign, we'll do a road show, and everybody will want to speak to him. Well, you know, for you and for me, the CEO may be one of the most important people in our lives, but we have to remember that we're competing for journalists' limited attention span and time. And in this economy, you know, a lot of publications have downsized, and journalists are responsible for more than ever, and they have less time to cover it. So you can't count on the fact that if the CEO is willing to speak, that they're going to want to hear from him or her. So now I'd like to talk about some of the differences. But again, before I delve into a few of the differences, I wanted to highlight some of those key tenets I referred to earlier that were similar. And this is in terms of the pitch where they're similar, and in terms of selecting a PR firm. You know, in terms of selecting a PR firm, the PR firm should have an understanding of your market segment. I mean, they should, both whether it's here or in the UK, wherever it is, a successful PR firm will have deep roots and will be able to speak your language, whether it's network security or internet telephony, whatever it is. They should have contacts in those relevant media, and they should be able to guide you strategically and tactically, you know, when necessary. And that doesn't matter which side of the pond you're on. In terms of pitching, however, the most important commonality on both sides is that the journalists need real news. You can't, and what we consider real news as marketing people may not be what the journalists consider news, because again, we're competing, you know, for limited time and attention span. And that you'll need to, hopefully, unless you know, rely on your PR firm for guidance. And you'll also need, hopefully, you know, clients to speak. So your clients, your customers will be your greatest assets, no matter where you are. But again, you need to have realistic expectations in terms of coverage. In terms of the differences, they're pretty substantial, not only in terms of what's covered, but how journalists like to be dealt with as well. In terms of what's covered, for example, the U.S., you know, is very interested in success stories. They like technology. They like startups. They like getting into the nitty-gritty details, innovation, new technologies. And though they're pressed for time, oftentimes these roadshows or these meetings are easier to be set up face-to-face. Whereas in the UK, I found that they like it short and sweet. They don't need necessarily all the time, all the ins and outs. And when it comes to reference accounts, these clients, which are our greatest assets that we can put forward, don't expect a journalist in the UK to use a US reference customer, unless it's a household name in the UK as well. Outside of the U.S., I found that most of the journalists, whether it's the UK, France, Spain, they like localized content, and they like local reference customers. And this is key, that just because something is covered in one country or another doesn't mean that both countries will see its news value. So I just wanted to recap with, you know, certain key factors that need to be taken into account to be successful. You need to have realistic budgets and expectations. You need to be able to set the success criteria to know if you've met those expectations. You need to be able to speak to your PR team in the same language to understand, you know, the common goals and how you're going to reach them. And both teams need to be very responsive. If the PR team isn't responsive, well, we have a problem. I've been very fortunate because My PR teams are exceptional. They have a lot of the key factors I was talking about. They have deep localized knowledge. They have deep contacts within their different fields, and strategically and tactically, they have amazing ideas which have led us to be able to get fantastic coverage. And on both sides, as I mentioned, they were very receptive and very responsive. So whenever you need your PR team, it's great if they can react quickly, and whenever they need you, you'll be much more effective if you can react quickly. It's key also, which I should have mentioned earlier, but the PR is not in a vacuum. As marketing professionals, we know that this needs to be done in tandem with sales and other marketing activities. So as I said before, you need to look at your PR team as an extension of your staff, and they need to have an understanding, even if it's not for coverage, everything that's going on from a marketing and sales perspective, because there are ways that they can leverage it that maybe out of the box are not ways you've thought of before. And I found again that it's been most effective to be able to allow access, direct access, to the management team for the PR company, and to let them establish their own relationships. And as well, we extend our clients, our customers, to the PR team to work with them. At the end of the day, though, the PR is very flexible. So like I said, you need to understand your strategy, what your end goals are, and then create your tactics to meet those strategies. And you need to meet with your PR team on a regular basis, not only weekly for your updates and things like that, but even quarterly to review and re-examine what those end goals are, and how you can define success, and then continue to move forward. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much for that, Aimee. I'd like now to introduce Josh Kail, who's heading up éclat Marketing's new US agency, and he's going to talk about it from the PR agent's perspective, having heard what Aimee's been saying from the client side. So over to you, Josh.
Thank you very much. So what I'll be speaking about today is how to, from my experience, how to best approach members of the North American media using all of the tools that you have at your hand to best reach them, meeting their expectations, as well as seeing the differences between North America and anywhere else in the world. So those go from the little things, as I put it, talking about what your story is as your product, your company, the message you're getting out, the role that press releases have in really helping forward that story, and how to best be prepared once the press release is out, once you've gotten the media's attention, what you really need to have on hand in order to ensure a smooth transition into a press hit. So the first thing are the little things, and when I say little things, what I'm talking about are basic spelling differences between US and UK English, structure of press releases, and really how the nitty-gritty stuff that is important but can be easily overlooked. So, for instance, with spelling, it's not, the example I use is fiber versus fiber with the ER or RE. It's not so much as which one you use, because when you present it to the media, they know what you're talking about. The important things here is being consistent in what you use. As far as spelling, for all of these could go either way words. Because what you don't want to have happen is if you have a press release or a byline article or anything that you're putting out to the media that's going to the US, UK, or English-speaking Europe, to have your North American team spell one way, send it over to the UK, have the UK team spell it the other way, and you end up with a document where the spelling of these words go back and forth, or from document to document it changes. It sets up a sense of inconsistency in the message that you're putting across. Is this something that would necessarily inhibit you straight out from getting your goals? Probably not, but what it does is it just limits the impact that you're having. And it also makes it more difficult for the media you're trying to attract, because then they have to go through and change it so that their publication looks like they're also being consistent. So when you're going with this, it's a simple conversation of which you want to use, how you want to use it, and then stick with that from that point on in all messaging, all releases, no matter where it's going out to. Other simple things that change when working within the U.S. versus anywhere else, or where your company may be coming from, are the basic structures of a press release. I had an instance with working with the U.S. and the U.K., and I wrote a press release. I sent it over to the U.K. to get their edits and their thoughts on it for distribution over there. And it was something as simple as how the headline of the press release was put together. So in the U.S., typically we put out block, all capital headline, and then the subheadline would be first letter capitalization for all the important words. But in the U.K., they don't do all caps, which seems like, again, a nothing moment until it was explained to me that when you send a release out with all caps in the headline to UK editors, it creates a bit of a ruckus over there, and they get really annoyed by it. So it's just being mindful of these things, these subtle differences that can, turn people off or turn them the wrong way from the get-go before you're able to say any words to them, before you're able to get to the point of why you're sending it to them. These little things can already set you in the wrong direction. So it's important to be aware of all of this when you're going out and setting your image forward, especially when you're trying to break into a region such as North America, because they don't necessarily know who you are. This is the very first meeting they have with you. It's the first contact they have with you. So you want to make sure everything is lined up so that those impressions are as positive as possible. So once you settle on this, which again is the little nitty-gritty stuff, and you get that out of the way, which is pretty easy to do, you have to decide on what your story is. When you come to a PR firm, whether it's in the U.S. or the U.K. or wherever, we know your product is great. We know your service is great. That's the focus of why you're going out to the media. That's what you want to do, is get the word out how great you are. But that doesn't necessarily mean that message of you are great is what's going to make a great news story, or what's going to interest the media. So if you have a product that does amazing things and has these great features that set you apart from other products within the industry, if you go out straight on that front, if you go say, we have these great little different things that make us great for the industry, you may get some interest, but not as much as if you craft that into what's the bigger picture. How do these changes, how do these bits of my service or product relate to the industry at hand? Because these publications are writing about the industry at large. And so they're interested in how you fit into that story, how you fit into that piece. So it's really about focusing on what these key points are that you want to get across, that you want to make known to everyone, but doing it in a way that presents it as part of a bigger picture. Because in doing so, you attract media attention, you get those hits that you want, and they're able to highlight your points that you want to get across. They're not interested in writing commercials. They have an entire department for advertising. They're more than happy to take your money, so you have those full-page color ads in the publications. I think a prime example is one of the clients that we currently work with within the tech sector is they've created a technology that is not only unique but groundbreaking, to the point that it far exceeded what most people in the industry thought was possible, and they were interested in breaking into the U.S. So here's an interesting situation where you have a company that, quite frankly, has a brand new technology that will change everything within its industry, and in that sense, it is the story that you'd be willing to put across. But because it's so different and so counterintuitive to what everyone in the industry was talking about, we couldn't actually go forward when breaking into North America saying, you know, this is what we have, this is how great it is, even though, again, it's a new technology and totally different, because no one believed it, no one knew who they were, and we had trouble getting traction just going straight on like that. So what we had to do, it was a slow build. So we had to first establish some sort of understanding in the industry. So we had to say, look, here's what the current technology is, and here are the limitations to it, and here's where this comes in and kind of fixes that limitations. But we had to go beyond that. We had to build the story ourselves. So we had to go to analysts. We had to get them to back it, to say this sounds like it works well based on the information they sent and looked at the numbers. It seems like it would be correct. Seems like it would be a real thing, and then go from there to have you know, third-party testing of this technology to create evidence, to create proof that this exists. And so then we started feeding this out, where it's not necessarily coming from the client themselves, but coming from these third parties that have tested it independently and said we found these amazing results. It's going against everything that we thought was possible within this spectrum, and really build it up from that. And once we had this, once we had the backing of analysts, once we had the third-party testing coming in and really you know, backing up what we're saying, then we were able to better go to the press and say, go on that story, like this is the great technology, this is where things are going, this is totally unexpected, but really what you should be focusing on, and here's what we have to build off of it. And we were able to do that and actually get this client into all of their target industry press based on this, and we're actually at the point now of continuing that story. So it's not a static thing. You're building what this story is. So now that we have this and people are believing that it's real, they understand it, we're able to then use that now faith in the company to say, now here's how it's applied to real-world problems that people across the industry are facing. Here are the problems, here are the solutions, all the while saying, pounding in the same facts of here are the key features of the technology, here's how it's great. All the stuff that you'd be doing in a sales call for one of your potential clients, but in a manner that is newsworthy, that becomes interesting to the media, it shows value to their readers, in which case they're more interested in writing about it. So it's taking what you want to say and figuring out the best way to say it, and that differs from how you would say it to a particular client. And it also differs from region to region because you have to look at what that industry in the region is talking about, what interests them the most. Sometimes there are overlaps because of the globalization of a lot of these technologies, and sometimes they're not based on the adoption rates of a given region. So North America tends to be more advanced in certain technologies, and then on others they tend to be slower in adopting new technologies. So you really have to gauge where the region is with what you're posing to them, and then build the story around that. So now we have the story, we have all the basic ins and outs of how we're going to say it, and you're writing the press release for it. So press releases have many roles. In a non-media capacity, if you write a press release, you put it out of the wire, it's great for search engine optimization, so when someone Googles your company name, it pops up with all these press releases. But I'm going to focus on the media aspect of it. So the press release is a great tool, but it's not the end goal. So the end goal is the article, that bigger story we were just talking about. The press release is the foot in the door. But there are certain things to keep in mind when you're sending out these press releases as far as expectations for return on them alone. So, and I'm sure my colleagues here will laugh at the numbers I'm giving, but for being so low. But the media tend to get, on average, the low end of things, 200 emails a day. They tend to get more emails on Mondays and Fridays. Fridays because basically people, it's the end of the week, they can just shoot out an email and people just dump these press releases, emails, and so on the members of the press. And there's a huge influx on Friday. And on Mondays, because of everything that built up from the end of the day Friday through the weekend, through Monday morning, they have just a buildup of stuff they're going through there. So there are tons of emails that an individual member of the media sorts through every day. What this means is they're not necessarily reading all 200, 400,000 emails, whatever it is a day. And if they are, they're not going to be able to pay that much attention to it unless it's something that really grips them or happens to be in relation to a story they're already working on or assigned by the editor or whatnot. So with this in mind, when you're putting that release out, messaging on it really needs to be short, sweet, and to the point. And this is for the release alone. When it comes to how they process an article and build it up, they're going to want those greater details. They're going to want all the nitty-gritty stuff. But for the release, it's basically what, in that window in front of their face, what are the points that they're going to see to get them to be a little more interested. So you need to talk about the messaging, back to that story. What is that one-sentence story relating it to the industry or latest news or whatever, that's connecting it to that newsworthiness. And then you're going to want to put the facts backing that up. So you know, it's similar to any paper you may have written in university or school. Of you have that thesis statement of how it applies to the larger picture, and then you have the points of how what your company's doing or what your product's doing is building up and directly relevant to that story. So when you're breaking in, especially when you're breaking into the North American market, so the first time when no one knows you, the chances of those first releases being read are diminished because they won't recognize the name of the company offhand, so they won't necessarily know what it has to do with anything, and the chances of being read without any incentive are pretty low. But where the release holds a great amount of value is that it's that foot in the door, because it's in the inbox. It's there sitting there for them and readily available to them, even if they don't read it. And this is where the release really comes into value, because then when your firm is going and making the follow-up calls and directly reaching out to these people, you can say, oh, did you see the release I sent you? It should be in your inbox. And 9 times out of 10, in my experience, when speaking to a member of the press and they're interested in what you're saying, they're able to pull up that email while they're on the call with you and read it right there. So then you're ensuring that it's getting in front of their face. You're ensuring that the important facts are there, easily accessible to them, to whet their appetite for a greater news story. And from there, it's really that launching point. So the release, just getting it in their inbox when you followed up with a call or when you followed up with that direct content is where the value of the release is, because they have the facts on hand. Even if they're not interested then, it's on their file system. And, you know, months later, they might be working on a story and they had that information, they remember it, they're able to go back and really access it. And as you go on and build these relationships, the more that they know your company and they know what your product is and they know what you're doing, and you've been providing them with these valuable bits of information, these valuable storylines, when those 200, 300 emails come in a day and they see your name pop up, they're less likely to just put it aside. They're more likely to read it. They're more likely to retain it and build off of that for future stories and come to you. So with the North American market, that's really the primary role of the press release. It's very rare where you would send it out to a member of the press and then with nothing else involved, they take it, write a great story about it, and get into those details that they want. It's just one tool you have in order to gain press attention. So the final thing is, once you have the press release in their face and they're interested, there are going to be some things that the media will be wanting and that you really should have prepared ahead of time prior to the release going out. Sometimes even before you have a finished version of the release or the media alert or the byline article or whatever you're putting out to the press. For one, every bit of information that you say in the release or in whatever you're putting needs to have some sort of hard evidence to back it up, so that if there's a follow-up question of why or how or anything else going a little bit deeper, you have something that you can readily send to them without any delay. I think the important thing here is to keep delay to a minimum, because, again, when you're getting these 200 emails a day and you're getting pitches every day, the longer the delay, the more likely they'll just go somewhere else for a different story, and you can lose that there. So by having the evidence to back it up, to say everything you're saying is not just hyperbole, not just puffery of claims that you're making, but something real that you can show, it really helps a lot. And it helps with the final article to have that greater detail going about your company, product, or service. Make sure that there's a company representative or spokesperson who's aware of what the messaging's been, aware of what those behind-the-scene conversations have been with your PR firm and your marketing team, and who is able to speak then to the press, not only as an expert on what your product is or what your service is, but as someone who's able to speak on it in the same terms that your marketing and PR team have been focused on getting the word out, so that there's no gap between what might be said or how something is said in a press release or in a phone call conversation with the ultimate interview with the company representative. The better prepared they are in speaking on those lines, the more consistent everything seems, the more real it seems. It doesn't seem like something's been made up along the way, and it really enhances the likelihood that not only that rep would be used for the article at hand, but then would become a valuable resource to the members of the media in the future if they're working on similar articles or want to talk about a certain issue within the industry. They can go back to you and really enhance your image that way. If you have clients able to speak on the topics, if you have clients able to speak on the topic at hand, it makes it even better, because then it's not just coming from you, it's a word from someone else whose money's on the line, whose clients are on the line by adopting your technology, adopting your services. It just is an added backup. Again, this is great if you have it. If you don't have someone on hand able to speak about the topic, it's fine, but this is just something that adds to it, makes it all the more valuable. Ultimately, with this whole thing is the easier that you make information available to the press, the seamlessness of it, the better chances are that whatever your outreach is going to result into an article, into coverage within the media. And by easier, this covers everything from making sure that the spelling of words are consistent, making sure that the structure of what you're sending out is consistent, making sure that the story is relevant to what they write about or the industry at hand, and really making sure all of the extra information, all of the interviews, all of the data, everything that you have is readily available and can be sent to them without delay, without shuffling of papers and trying to find something available. If you follow this and really put it together in a package like that, then you're greatly increasing your chances of breaking through to the media, especially when you're first getting into the North American market, because it establishes you as a company, aside with having the great product or great service, as a company that really is prepared and is a friend of the press, someone that can help them with their articles, because that makes their lives a lot easier. So thank you, and that concludes my part of the presentation.
Well, thanks very much for that, Josh. And now I'd like to introduce the star of the show, Mr. Danny Bradbury. Danny's a UK guy who's been a journalist in technology for, well, I guess at least 20 years. He moved from the UK to Canada, which is where he's based today, and he works with both the British media as well as the US media. So he's going to give us a little insight from a journalist perspective. Thanks, Danny, and over to you.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, thanks for having me onto this this webinar. And yeah, I'm here basically to tell you some of the differences and also some of the similarities between over here and over there. So I guess I'm actually over there and you guys are over here, if we're looking at this from a Brit perspective. But yeah, basically I started in 1989 as a cub journalist in the UK, and worked there. Went freelance in '94, and then worked as a journalist, freelance journalist over in the UK until about 1999, and then I moved over to Canada, and I've been here ever since. So I've got a sort of, and I write for people on both sides of the pond, so I've got a pretty good perspective on not only on how magazines and editors and journalists and PR firms work, but also on sort of what journalists are like and what their what their sort of preoccupations and predilections are on both sides of the pond. So I'll rattle through because I think we're sort of behind on time, but basically this is a map. I'm assuming you can all hear me and you can all see this. This is a map of the US. It's 5 times the population of the UK. I think adult population is about 310 million. I think the UK population is about 61 million, and you can see this. It's just an incredibly segmented map, and there's lots of, the red bits are sort of population density. I used to live sort of in the flyover states, just north of Montana, where it's kind of deserted, but there's still some pockets of activity, and then of course on both sides of the population is larger. It's also it's large enough and distributed over a wide enough geographic area that different people kind of have different different cultural tropes, more so than in the UK. I mean, if you're a Mancunian and you go down to London in the UK, there's a fairly big cultural difference, but you're kind of still part of the same group. But people have often said in the US that New York's kind of its own country, and California's got a whole different culture, and there's this sort of big West Coast, East Coast thing. And so, the cultural considerations, the economic considerations, everything, the political considerations in different parts of the US are different. And so that creates some differences, or some opportunities, in fact, when you're looking at PR coverage. Guys, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of flick through my slides, and hopefully you'll plug back in when people start to see them when you plug back in the video. So basically, what this means, for example, is for things like survey coverage. If you're doing a survey in the UK, most surveys I see in the UK are fairly basic in their message, especially in security. You'll see, 60% of people give their passwords away for chocolate, or that kind of stuff, and it's sort of good for headlines, grabs people's attention, and these things are sort of fairly flat in terms of dimension, which is fine because it's a good solid message, and it it gets the headlines. But over in the US, or North America in general, where those populations are much more distributed, both in terms of geography and approach and outlook, you can actually you can make the surveys a lot more in depth, and you can divide up the findings of those surveys and sort of feed those to the press over a period of weeks or months, which is great because it means you can milk the research you've paid for a lot more. So that's one thing to consider. Moving on to the next slide. This is kind of my horror slide. This is what keeps me up at night. I'm not sure if you guys can see this now, but it's a slide showing the fortunes of the US newspaper industry. And so there's the yellow band at the top is kind of the total revenues, I think, from advertising and subscriptions in the US newspaper business. The blue bit is print, and the red bit is online. And so online is kind of rising a little bit over year on year, but not a huge amount. In real terms, and the print stuff's just plummeted, right? Which means that overall the total sort of economy of the US newspaper sector is just tanked. And obviously, as you can see, if you can see the graph, the financial crisis didn't help. And so, what this means, but there's 24 quarters of shrinkage. So, us poor editors and employed journalists and unemployed journalists like me, sort of self-employed freelancers, we've all been suffering, right? We have to cram a lot more into our day because there are fewer people working on a paper. They've let a lot of journalists go, and so everyone's basically trying to do more with less, and so that has significant impacts for companies that are trying to do PR. One figure, I was actually researching this, and one figure I hadn't run across, which scared the bejesus out of me, is that Google is now worth more than the entire newspaper industry, which just absolutely sent shivers down my spine. And the fact that it happened so incredibly quickly, it's just mind-boggling to me. I'm sure I didn't actually get solid figures for the UK or current figures, but basically, they've had similar issues, and everyone's suffering, right? A lot of budgets are disappearing. People aren't using freelancers as much. They're getting rid of internal staff. It's kind of a bit of a bloodbath out there. But again, when you're looking at your own PR activity and your own PR budget, that carries significant opportunity for you if you handle it right. Okay, so some differences between the US press and the UK press. It's kind of an interesting sort of juxtaposition here. I mean, the top line, and obviously there's going to be lots of exceptions, so it's always dangerous to generalize. But what I generally find is that the US press is often more PR driven. They're often, I mean, everyone's got, frankly, and I'm sorry guys, but everyone's got a love-hate relationship with PR in journalism, and you see this on the blogs all the time. Frankly, it's kind of a tiresome discussion at this point. But it's true. Journalists really need PR people, often don't appreciate them enough, and but they also, whine about them a lot. But that happens on both sides of the pond. But what I generally find is that US press is more driven by PR. So they're more open to sort of taking PR-driven messages rather than doing lots of hard-hitting investigative stuff. again with some exceptions, but they often have a much clearer and well-defined set of ethics. So you'll often find on US journalist sites disclosure statements and ethics policies, and they're actually, last time I looked, they were far less prevalent on UK sites, and yet, behind the scenes you've got UK people, myself included, doing copywriting and ghostwriting for lots of companies in their field, and it's kind of a given. And you also have UK people flying off on press trips that are being paid for and getting product review that doesn't get given back. And I've heard some US people complaining about this and sort of claiming we're all a bunch of sort of corrupt hacks. None of that's true. It's just that people have different approaches to ethics on both sides. Some are more solid and apparent, and some aren't. On the other side, on the UK side, you'll often find journalists take all this stuff, they'll go on a free press trip, they'll take the kit and review it and then use it afterwards, but they also kind of bite the hand that feeds them. And in fact, the Register, that's his tagline, biting the hand that feeds IT. So you'll get journalists that kind of have a hidden ethic, and they'll almost be more hard-hitting in some UK press because they feel they have to be, I think, and it's partly a cultural thing. Yeah, UK press, history of irreverence. This is what I looked like a couple of years ago, and essentially you've got this sort of cultural approach in the UK that we're being irreverent and almost kind of naughty in our coverage, and you can see it historically with publications such as Private Eye, and then with the Reg and a few others, where the press sort of goes out of its way to be deliberately disruptive and kind of embarrass vendors and be aggressive in terms of its questioning, which I think is great. It's all kind of healthy. I generally find that US press are a lot more polite, when they cover the industry. Again, all caveats apply. Generalizations bouncing off the walls here, but it's a general feeling, an impression I get when dealing with people on both sides of the pond. Okay, bloggers. No one's really talked about bloggers, and it's they're kind of an important part of the whole equation. I mean, there's that discussion about whether bloggers are journalists kind of ended in 2005, and I think most people decided that they were, even though their economy is different and the way they work is different. But generally, I find that bloggers are more influential in the US, and this chap here is, as I'm sure many of you know, is Robert Scoble, who's was an amazingly successful and powerful blogger, and still is. Worked at Microsoft and I think now works at Rackspace. And what's interesting about this is that a lot of bloggers end up overlapping with the industry. So Scoble went off to work for Rackspace. He was a blogger when he was at Microsoft, but he's still seen as like this amazing independent voice. And so the overlap between sort of the fourth estate, if you like, and industry, I think is a lot closer. There's a big blurring of the lines, especially in the US, where bloggers are incredibly powerful. And this guy here is Michael Arrington, who came from industry, sort of founded a bunch of companies and worked as a COO in a bunch of companies, and became incredibly successful. We saw before starting in TechCrunch, which as a blogger, which many of you know just became incredibly powerful. It's almost like the Slashdot effect. If you get TechCrunch, then be prepared for an awful lot of traffic, and that's what a lot of companies look for. Is that incredible traffic spike if they get covered by TechCrunch. And then TechCrunch got bought by HuffPost. There's this big row between Arrington and Arianna Huffington and AOL and all these guys, and he went off to form Crunch Fund, which is essentially a sort of VC fund. So you can see how this sort of overlap between bloggers and industry. Well, it's basically one is the other in many cases. Arrington's an industry guy, very talented at what he does, and there's split between sort of external coverage or independent coverage of the tech industry and actually being part of the tech industry. And we see that a lot, and I don't really see that as much in the UK. Generally, I mean, there's an awful lot of overlap between journalists and PRs in the sense that journalists will often go and work in PR, and I've seen some PR people, some PR executives come and work as journalists. So there's that level of overlap, but not at this sort of deeply integrated economic level that I see in the US. What else? Okay, yeah, I'm just. I mean, people have covered press releases. I've got. I mean, I agree with much of what he said, but I think I'd like to just sort of situate this whole relationship between journalists and PR people a little more from a journalist perspective. And yeah, it was really interesting today. I got up, you know, a little bit early for the call, and once again I had a voicemail left at 4 a.m. by a Brit, a British PR person, you know, chasing me for some feature. Every morning this girl calls up and she leaves a voicemail at 4 a.m. Sort of chasing me. You know, she's one of like 30 people that has pitched me for this thing, and you know, it just shows. I mean, I politely mailed back and said, hey, you know, do you realise that I'm over on the west coast here? You know, check my area. Check the area code that you're dialing. It's like a 415 area code, and you know, she didn't get it, and it just sort of shows a lack of research. You know, it's you know, she wants to speak to me, but she's calling me, you know, 2 or 3 hours before I get up. So, you know, it's that kind of lack of preparedness that I think resonates across all journalists, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the US or the UK. You know, this whole thing about attention to detail and getting the facts in. Well, frankly, we're all human, and we all, you know, want the same thing. And from that perspective, you know, I don't think it matters what side of the pond you're on. And you know, really good examples of this. You know, UK journalists, you know, complain about PR people all the time, poor PR people, because they do an amazing job. But you know, I've seen this. Chris Anderson, he's the editor of Wired. You know, he banned whole, you know, swathes of PR people. He basically blocked them from his email account because they were emailing the wrong account, and they were emailing stuff that that wasn't appropriate, and that just didn't speak to him or his audience. And he was just fed up with this kind of spray and pray approach that we often see with PR. And again, doesn't matter what side of the pond you're on. If you spray and pray and you don't sort of adopt this boutique approach where you're targeted, you're actually going to do yourself a disservice in terms of PR. And it's really, and you know, the tricky part is that it gets really difficult to do this the more journalists you're dealing with. You know, it's a very global industry now, and so you're often dealing with, you know, this huge list of journalists on both sides of the Atlantic, and you know, trying to keep track of them all and their interests. It's really difficult, and you know, I don't envy people that job. So, but you know, there are some things you can do, and I love relaying horror stories because I love to complain as much as the next guy. I did an interview with someone, you know, the other week. You know, sent over a really detailed brief, whole bunch of questions to the PR company. PR company, you know, diligently passed it on to the client, and you know, I'm sure briefed the client well. And then, you know, the client calls me, and it's a different guy than the one that I've been booked in the calendar. And he says, "Oh, you're writing a feature about A." And I'm like, "Well, no, actually, the feature's about B. It's got nothing to do with A. Have you read the brief?" And he said, "No, I haven't. You know, I haven't seen any brief. I haven't done any preparation. I'm not really sure who you are or what you're writing about." And so I just you know, politely ended the interview. I mean, there's just no point. It's a waste of both our time. And it's just an example of the kind of stuff that's still happening in PR that shouldn't be. And I guarantee you, whether you're in the US or the UK, you know, if that happens to a journalist, they're probably not going to want to speak to you again. Okay, releases, yeah, lots of detail is kind of a tricky one because, you know, not all detail is good detail. Lots of detail is kind of puff and just means that, you know, it's just making it more difficult for the journalist to read. You know, remember that 24 quarters of shrinkage, and how many, 200 I'd say is probably an understatement, how many emails most journalists have to deal with. My little secret is that I have a releases inbox that isn't even connected to my email account anymore. I just basically, whenever someone sends a crappy press release to my regular address, I just send them a polite email saying, "Please send it to releases at," and you know, then I just never read it again because it's stuff it's just taken away from the from my real work. So if you really want to stand out, I'd say, you know, to take this cutting out the extraneous stuff and replacing it with actual solid, really good, useful detail to the extreme. I can tell you what I'd like to see and what I never see, if that helps you. I'd like to see an email that consists of just 2 or 3 sentences as a press release, basically telling me, you know, the very, very bare bones in a way that's really going to grab my attention. Which actually would stop most people sending press releases because, you know, probably a lot of press releases don't have anything to say, and so the ones that are left that actually do have stuff to say, then I would have them just 2 or 3 sentences and link into a web page with a whole bunch of incredibly useful stuff. You know, high-res photos so that I can instantly put it in my magazine or my website when I want to. Graphs of independently researched data so that I can see the facts that set the context for the industry. Yeah, you know, Twitter feeds, all that sort of stuff. I mean, kind of the social media release on steroids and done properly. I never see this stuff. You know, it's just open for someone to be doing this and to set journalists alight because it would frankly be so refreshing to see this. It would also be great for SEO, because then your stuff's online, and your SEO for your press room would just skyrocket, especially when you put video on, because video is like huge for SEO this year. So what else? Yeah, include just the bare facts and product features, same sort of thing. The number of press releases I see where you've got quotes from 5 different executives and they're all canned, and no one ever's going to use them, because one of the first rules is that you really don't use quotes from press releases. That stuff can all just be stripped out. The less useless detail, the better. The more facts that I'm actually going to be using and find interesting, the better. And again, it's going to make me much more likely to reconnect my email account and actually read some of these press releases that are coming through. But this is a battle I've been fighting for years. That's kind of why I gave up. Okay, so what else? Yeah, basically do the job for the journalist. You literally, guys, do the job for the journalist, right? I've got, there have been times when I've got five stories to get out in 3 hours. And I've got no budget and no time to do it, and I'm desperate for like good stuff that is going to grab my attention and is also going to get traffic to the site. If you can actually help me do that as a journalist, I'd love you forever. I don't want to have your babies, but it just often I'm fighting for this sort of useful content. So when pitching to titles with US and UK writers, and there are more of these, you're seeing sort of lots of UK media being bought out by US media. You're seeing these sort of big conglomerates as media consolidates, and so you've got often lots of people that are essentially fighting under the same flag, but they may be working for different subsidiaries. And so it's kind of a tricky one, because you don't want to pitch the same story to a bunch of people in an organization on both sides of the Atlantic, and then have them sort of both write the same thing for a single news wire, and then have them annoyed because they've been sort of double sold and you're double dipping. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to pitch the same story, make sure you keep people aware. Make sure you've got your one guy in the US and your one girl in the UK that work for the same newswire, and you pitch them both and say, hey, Jack and Jill, I'm pitching you both this story. If you want a different take on it from a UK-US perspective, our interviews are available, but make sure that they are aware that you're pitching to both. It really helps if you can, when pitching stories to US and UK journalists are essentially working for the same company. It helps if you can tailor your pitch to those different audiences. And so what I would encourage you to do, even though it's more work, is to look for local hooks, and that might be political. Although again, I know that can be tricky, because it's dangerous sort of floating a political angle on a story for a vendor. But that's an example of something that would be useful, or an economic angle, or just some other sort of local news story that you could bounce off. If someone be really silly in terms of what they've said, while working for a company, and it's like splashed all over the front page, and they've had to take it back and make an apology. Can you maybe make that into a piece about your software for monitoring employee comments or what have you. But try and find local news stories that actually help you to sort of tweak a story for covering both sides of the pond. What else? A second. Q&A. There is one other thing I wanted to say before I hand it off. And that is, I saw a really good example of really well-targeted PR, and it didn't involve any spray and pray at all. The guy that I saw do this, and I've actually done it in my own. I've got a couple of businesses on the side that I do my own PR for, and he basically set up a camera and shot a video, 20 separate videos for 20 separate people. Basically all the same thing. He sat in front of nice background, and then recorded the same video with a few different words in each video. Hi Bob at blog.com. We've just launched this product. I think you'd find it really interesting. I'd love to have a call with you. I know that recently you covered X and Y, so I'm thinking this might be interesting. And so, and then he sent that a link to that video with a password online to each of those 20 bloggers. And so each blogger got this very short, snappy, sweet email in their inbox, addressed to them, personalized for them, and when they clicked on it, they got a video made for them. And I guarantee this guy probably knocked this out in about an hour and a half. Almost no editing, just sucking stuff off a camera card and then uploading it to Vimeo. And he got an amazing response, and these bloggers loved it, and they tweeted everywhere, and it was great PR and social media. And the way that he did this was just to think carefully about his audience, target what he was doing, research it well before he did it, and essentially do surgical PR. And it comes back to this idea of instead of sending out 10,000 press releases and then trying to get an intern to sort of call each one and ask them if they got the press release, what I would do is send it out to a small number of people, a smaller number of key players, and actually research them first. Make sure that you're sending it out to people that are going to want to read this stuff. So it kind of at odds a little bit with what's been said before. As a journalist, this is what I look for. You would be doing me and my colleagues in cash-strapped journalism land a great service if you did some of this stuff. I'm going to finish it up there and hand it back, and thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much for that, Danny. That's great. Now we do have a few questions, and I know we're a little bit over time, so I'll ask the panelists to answer them as briefly as possible. And the first one's for Aimee, and the question is, how do you measure PR success?
Okay, well, that's a very good question, but that really is dependent on your strategic end goals. So the number of instances, even in the contracts that we do, we will put who we're targeting and have benchmarks for we need to get X number of hits, or we need to have X number of meetings. That said, you need realistic expectations. So you need to be able to provide the PR team the materials to get those meetings or those interviews. And as you've heard from the previous panelists, journalists want real news, and they don't want cookie-cutter stuff. So, you can do it based on number of hits. If you use a financial PR firm, if you're publicly traded, you can link it as well slightly to the moves in the stock changes. You can do it by lead generation. You do PR campaigns, and you can see and track. I'm a big believer in analytics. If you've had spikes, we see, for example, a number of forms on our website, contact us, the how to buy. We put lead sources, and we'll see that they state that they're media articles. So there are a number of ways, but again, it has to be linked to what your goal is, because that makes all the difference. In the UK, for example, we're traded on the AIM, on the FTSE, so it's important for me not only to get additional prospects. It's important to see what happens with their share price. In the U.S., for example, it's the lead generation is very important. So we target certain kinds of publications, and we look to see how many hits we have relative to those. We can track them. So also is what you want to get out of your PR firm. For example, we are in Asia. I've just contracted some firms, and I'm doing it in a completely different way than I do it in the United States or the UK. What I expect and how I plan on promoting the news. For the UK, clearly, I would recommend éclat. I've been doing this for many, many years, and coming from the journalist perspective, having done that for over a decade, and now from the PR perspective, this is one of the first times, and I'm paying them, and they're not paying me to say this, but this is one of the first times I've dealt with a team that I actually rely on for strategy and to help me, and I bring them into my conversations with the other management team members, saying, this is our end goal, and they've come up with some pretty interesting out-of-the-box ideas, not dissimilar to things we just even heard about with videos and things like that, to garner the attention that we need. As far as China, we're using a firm in Taiwan. You're more than welcome to éclat to contact me, and I'd be happy to to relay any further information that I can.
Okay, thanks for that, Aimee. In which case, I think that brings the webinar to a close. Thanks to all of those who attended. Thanks very much to all of the speakers. And, we'll hope to speak to you again soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.